Kale stood at the edge of the landing pad, his four-fingered hands gripping the railing tightly as he gazed out over the strange new world. The air smelled different here, sharp and earthy, with a faint tang of something metallic that made his sensitive nose twitch. His large, almond-shaped eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the towering trees swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves shimmering like emeralds under the golden sunlight. It was beautiful, yes, but also unsettling. Everything about this place felt raw and untamed. Earth, a Class 13 death world. Kyle had read all the reports, studied the data meticulously before his arrival. He knew the dangers: unpredictable weather patterns, aggressive wildlife, and an environment so volatile it could kill even the most prepared traveler within days. Yet nothing in the simulations or training modules had prepared him for the reality of standing on this planet's surface. Every sound, every movement seemed amplified, as if the land itself were alive and watching him. Beside him, a young woman approached. She wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt tucked into jeans, and her blonde hair was tied back in a loose ponytail. Her name was Lucy Harper, according to the briefing files. She was supposed to be his guide during his stay on Earth, helping him acclimate to human customs and culture. But what struck Kale immediately was how ordinary she looked. No elaborate robes, no ceremonial markings, not even any visible technology on her person. Just a plain, unremarkable human. "Hey there," Lucy said, her voice warm and casual. "You must be Kyle. Welcome to Pine Ridge." Kyle blinked, momentarily confused by her tone. Humans were supposed to be awestruck by visitors from other worlds, weren't they? The educational vids he'd watched always showed crowds gathering, cheering, or at least bowing respectfully when an alien arrived. But Lucy just stood there, smiling as though meeting someone from another galaxy was no big deal. "Greetings," Kyle replied, his deep voice carrying a slight hum due to the translator device embedded in his throat. "I am honored to make your acquaintance," Lucy chuckled softly, shaking her head. "No need to get all formal with me. Around here, we keep things pretty laid back." She gestured toward the path leading away from the landing pad. "Come on, I'll show you around. You've got a lot to see." Kale hesitated, glancing down at his sleek silver suit which shimmered faintly in the sunlight. It was designed to protect him from Earth's harsh atmosphere, filtering out harmful particles and regulating his body temperature. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that stepping off the safety of the landing pad would expose him to unseen threats. "Is it safe?" he asked cautiously. Lucy raised an eyebrow. "Safe enough. Sure, there are snakes and bugs and stuff, but nothing you can't handle if you're careful. Besides, I'll be right here with you." Her confidence puzzled Kale. Didn't she understand? The risks. Back on Vera, his home planet, every potential hazard was identified and neutralized long before anyone encountered it. Here, humans seemed to accept danger as part of everyday life. It was baffling, and more than a little frightening. Reluctantly, Kale followed Lucy down the narrow dirt path. The ground beneath his feet felt uneven and rough, unlike the smooth surfaces he was used to. Tall grass brushed against his legs and insects buzzed lazily in the air. As they walked, Lucy pointed out various features of the landscape: clusters of wildflowers, patches of mushrooms growing near tree roots, and the distant sound of water trickling from a nearby stream. "This is one of my favorite spots," Lucy said, stopping beside a massive oak tree whose branches stretched high into the sky. "It's peaceful here, quiet. Good place to think." Kale tilted his head, studying the tree. Its bark was cracked and gnarled, its leaves fluttering softly in the wind. To him it looked ancient, almost fragile, and yet it stood tall and strong, defying the elements year after year. There was something admirable about that, he thought. "You spend much time outside?" Lucy asked, breaking the silence. "Not often," Kyle admitted. "On Vera, our cities are enclosed environments, climate-controlled, sterile. Nature is managed." Lucy frowned slightly as if trying to imagine such a world. Manage nature? That sounds kind of boring. Kyle stiffened, unsure whether to take offense. Boring? It ensures safety and efficiency. Uncontrolled nature can be dangerous, she shrugged. Maybe, but it's also where the magic happens. Look around you, Kale. This is life. Messy, unpredictable, but real. Before Kale could respond, a rustling noise caught his attention. He turned sharply, his heart racing as he spotted movement in the bushes. A small creature emerged, a furry animal with bushy ears and a twitching nose. It paused, sniffed the air, then scampered off into the underbrush. "What was that?" Cal demanded, his voice rising slightly. Lucy laughed. "Just a squirrel. Harmless little guy. They're everywhere around here." "A squirrel," Kyle repeated, staring at the spot where the creature had disappeared. He hadn't seen anything like it before. On Vera, animals were either domesticated pets or carefully monitored specimens in controlled habitats. Seeing one run freely through the wilderness felt surreal. As they continued walking, Lucy explained more about the area. Pine Ridge was a small farming community nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. Most people lived off the land, growing crops and raising livestock. Life wasn't easy, she admitted, but it was rewarding. "We don't have fancy gadgets or hovercars or whatever," Lucy said, kicking a pebble off the path. "But we've got each other, and we've got this." She spread her arms wide, gesturing to the vast expanse of greenery around them. Cale found himself struggling to process everything. The simplicity of it all was both fascinating and disorienting. How could these humans thrive in such chaotic conditions? Why did they choose to live this way when they could presumably build safer, more efficient systems? By late afternoon, clouds began gathering overhead, darkening the sky. Lucy glanced up, shielding her eyes from the sudden brightness of lightning flashing in the distance. "Looks like rain," she remarked casually. "We should head back." "Rain?" Kyle echoed, alarmed. "Isn't that dangerous?" Lucy smirked. "Only if you're dumb enough to stand under a tree during a storm. Don't worry, I won't let you get electrocuted." The comment did little to reassure Cale. By the time they reached Lucy's house, a modest wooden structure with a creaky porch and flower boxes hanging below the windows, the first drops of rain were already falling. Within minutes, the drizzle turned into a full-blown downpour, complete with booming thunder and jagged streaks of lightning illuminating the sky. Inside, Cale perched awkwardly on the edge of a chair, his suit damp despite its protective coating. Lucy busied herself making tea, humming softly as she moved around the kitchen. The cozy interior contrasted sharply with the chaos outside, and Cale found himself marveling at the contrast. "So," Lucy said, handing him a steaming mug. "What do you think so far? Pretty wild, huh?" Cale hesitated, searching for the right words. "It is overwhelming. Everything feels so alive, dangerous, unpredictable." Lucy grinned. "That's Earth for you. But hey, isn't that better than being cooped up in some bubble all day?" Cale didn't answer right away. Instead, he sipped the tea, letting the warmth seep into his body. For the first time since arriving, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was something extraordinary about this peculiar little planet, something worth exploring further. Outside, the storm raged on, but, inside, a quiet calm settled between them. And for a brief moment, Cale felt less like an outsider and more like someone who might belong. The next morning, Cale woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside. At first, he thought it was some kind of malfunction in his translator device. It couldn't possibly be natural. But when he stepped onto the porch of Lucy's house, he saw dozens of small feathered creatures flitting between branches, singing their strange melodic songs. The sight left him both amazed and uneasy. On Vera, animals were either silent or programmed to mimic specific sounds for entertainment purposes. This chaotic symphony felt foreign yet strangely beautiful. Lucy joined him a few minutes later, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. She handed one to Cale without saying a word, leaning against the railing as she sipped hers. Her presence was calming, though Cale still found himself analyzing every detail about her. She didn't seem bothered, by the early hour or the cool breeze that sent shivers through his suit. Instead, she looked completely at ease, as if this was just another ordinary day. "You're staring?" Lucy said finally, breaking the silence with a teasing smile. Kyle blinked, realizing he'd been caught. "I apologize. It is unusual for me to observe someone so comfortable in such conditions." Lucy laughed softly. "You mean because I'm not freaking out about bugs or dirt or whatever? Trust me, after growing up here, you get used to it." Kale nodded but didn't reply. He wasn't sure how to explain that what seemed normal to her was anything but ordinary to him. Growing up on Vera, he had never touched soil or felt rain on his skin. His world was pristine, sterile, and meticulously controlled. Here, everything was messy, unpredictable, and alive in ways that both fascinated and terrified him. After finishing their tea, Lucy led Kale to the fields behind her house. Rows of crops stretched across the land: corn, beans, and something she called pumpkins. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the earth. Farmers worked nearby using tools that looked primitive compared to the advanced machinery Kale was accustomed to. Some carried hoes, others pushed wheelbarrows filled with harvested vegetables. Despite the simplicity of their methods, they moved with purpose, chatting and laughing as they labored. "This is my family's farm," Lucy explained, gesturing toward the nearest row of corn. "We grow most of our own food. It's hard work, but it keeps us fed." Kale watched silently as Lucy knelt beside a plant and began pulling weeds from the soil. Her hands moved quickly, deftly separating the unwanted greenery from the crop. He noticed blisters forming on her palms, tiny reminders of the effort required to sustain life here. Yet she didn't complain. In fact, she hummed softly as she worked, seemingly content. "Do you always do this alone?" Kyle asked after a while. Lucy shook her head. "Nah, usually my brother helps, but he's busy fixing the tractor today. We take turns. That's how it works around here. You pitch in where you're needed." Kale frowned. "And no one resents having to contribute?" Lucy paused, looking up at him with a curious expression. "Resent? Why would we? If we don't help each other, nothing gets done. Besides, it's not like we have robots doing all the work for us." The idea struck Kale as absurd. Back home, machines handled nearly every task, leaving individuals free to pursue intellectual or artistic endeavors. Physical labor was considered inefficient and unnecessary. Yet here, humans willingly subjected themselves to grueling routines, relying solely on their own strength and determination. It made no logical sense, yet there was an undeniable charm to it, a sense of unity and shared purpose that he couldn't quite put into words. As the day wore on, Kale continued observing Lucy and the other farmers. They took breaks often, sitting together under the shade of a large tree to share water and snacks. Conversations flowed easily, ranging from jokes about local gossip to discussions about upcoming harvests. Kale listened intently, trying to understand the dynamics at play. There was no hierarchy, no formal structure dictating who spoke when or how decisions were made. Everyone simply contributed what they could, trusting one another to pull their weight. When evening fell, the group gathered around a bonfire near the edge of the field. Someone had brought a guitar, and soft melodies drifted through the air as stars began appearing overhead. Kyle sat slightly apart from the circle, feeling both intrigued and out of place. These moments of connection, the laughter, the music, the camaraderie, felt deeply personal, almost sacred. He wondered if anyone else realized how remarkable they truly were. Lucy noticed his quiet demeanor and scooted closer, offering him a plate piled high with roasted vegetables and grilled meat. "Hungry?" she asked, nudging him gently. Kyle hesitated before accepting the plate. The food smelled strong, earthy, and smoky, but he recognized some of the ingredients from earlier. Still, eating something prepared in such a rudimentary way felt risky. What if it wasn't properly sanitized? What if it contained harmful bacteria? "It's safe," Lucy assured him, reading his hesitation. "We've been cooking like this forever." Trusting her judgment, Kale took a cautious, to his surprise, the flavors exploded in his mouth. rich, savory, and unlike anything he'd ever tasted. On Vera, meals were synthesized in labs designed to meet nutritional requirements without much thought given to taste. This, however, was different. Each bite carried the essence of the land, the care of the people who grew and prepared it. For the first time, Kale understood why humans placed such importance on food, not just as sustenance but as a way to connect with one another. As the night deepened, the conversation turned to stories. One man recounted a close encounter with a bear during last year's hunting season, his voice animated as he described the adrenaline rush of facing the massive creature. A woman shared a tale about getting lost in the woods as a child, only to be rescued by a neighbor who followed her cries for help. Even Lucy chimed in, recounting a particularly wild storm that had knocked out power for days, forcing everyone to rely on candles and firewood. Kale listened intently, marveling at how casually these humans discussed danger. They didn't shy away from it or try to eliminate it entirely. Instead, they embraced it as part of life, weaving it into their narratives like threads in a tapestry. It was a perspective he struggled to comprehend but couldn't dismiss. Eventually, the group began to disperse, heading back to their homes as fatigue set in. Lucy stayed behind to douse the fire, ensuring no embers remained to spark another blaze. Kale offered to help, though he wasn't sure what to do. She handed him a bucket of water and instructed him to pour it slowly over the ashes. "You're learning," she said approvingly as they finished the task. "Not bad for your second day." Kale managed a small smile, feeling a flicker of pride despite himself. "Thank you for showing me this. Your way of life is different from what I expected." Lucy shrugged. "Different doesn't mean worse. Sometimes it's better. You'll see." On the walk back to the house, Kale found himself reflecting on the day's events. The physical labor, the shared meals, the stories told under the stars, all of it added up to something greater than the sum of its parts. Humans weren't just surviving on this death world. They were thriving, finding joy and meaning in the midst of chaos. It was a revelation that challenged everything he thought he knew about resilience and progress. As they reached the porch, Lucy turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You ever heard the phrase, 'you only live once'?" Kyle shook his head. "No, what does it mean?" Lucy grinned. "It means life's short, so you might as well make the most of it. Take risks, try new things, enjoy the ride. You never know when it'll end." Her words lingered in Kyle's mind long after they went inside. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling as unfamiliar sounds filtered through the walls. Crickets, chirping, wind-rustling leaves, distant hoots of nocturnal creatures. For the first time, he didn't feel afraid. Instead, he felt curious. Maybe Lucy was right. Maybe living on a death world wasn't a curse. Maybe it was an opportunity to embrace uncertainty, to find beauty in imperfection, and to discover what it truly meant to be alive. The third day on Earth started earlier than Kale expected. Lucy had woken him up just as the first rays of sunlight began creeping over the horizon, explaining that they needed to gather medicinal herbs from the nearby mountains before the afternoon. Heat set in. Kyle groaned inwardly but followed her anyway, still adjusting to the human habit of rising with the sun. On Vera, people slept and worked according to a regulated schedule, unaffected by natural cycles. Here everything seemed tied to the rhythm of the planet itself. As they walked along a narrow dirt trail leading into the foothills, Kale noticed how different the landscape was compared to the farmland he'd seen the previous day. The air grew cooler as they climbed higher, and the trees became denser, their branches forming a canopy overhead that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. The sounds of birds and insects faded, replaced by the soft crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of unseen animals moving through the underbrush. Lucy carried a woven basket slung over one arm, occasionally stopping to examine plants growing alongside the path. She pointed out various herbs, chamomile for calming nerves, mint for digestion, and something called echinacea, which she claimed helped boost immunity. Kale listened carefully, trying to memorize each plant's appearance and purpose. It fascinated him how humans relied on nature to heal themselves, rather than synthetic medicines produced in sterile labs. Despite his interest, Cale couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him as they ventured deeper into the wilderness. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound louder. He found himself constantly scanning the surroundings, half expecting some predator to leap out at any moment. Lucy, however, remained unfazed, humming softly as she collected herbs and tucked them carefully into her basket. "You're tense," Lucy remarked after a while, glancing back at him. "You okay?" Cale hesitated before answering. "This environment, it feels dangerous. Are there predators here?" Lucy nodded casually. "Sure. Bears, mountain lions, wolves. But we don't usually run into them unless we're unlucky." "Unlucky?" Kyle echoed, his voice tinged with alarm. "And what happens if we are unlucky?" Lucy shrugged. "We deal with it. That's life on Earth." Her nonchalant attitude baffled Cale. How could she remain so calm knowing there were creatures lurking nearby that could easily kill them? Back on Vera, such threats would have been eradicated centuries ago. Here, humans coexisted with danger, accepting it as part of their reality. It was both admirable and terrifying. Their conversation was interrupted by a low growl emanating from the bushes ahead. Both froze, staring at the source of the noise. A large shape emerged. A bear, its fur matted and eyes gleaming with curiosity. Cale's heart pounded as he took a step backward, instinctively reaching for the emergency device strapped to his belt. Surely this was the moment where Lucy would scream or run, or at least call for help. But she did none of those things. Instead, she stood her ground, raising her arms above her head and making herself appear larger. Her voice rang out loud and clear as she shouted, "Hey, get out of here! Go on!" To Cale's astonishment, the bear hesitated, sniffing the air before lumbering off into the trees. Within moments, it was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of musk and the memory of its imposing presence. Cale stared at Lucy, his mouth agape. You faced it. Why didn't you flee?" Lucy lowered her arms, brushing stray strands of hair from her face. "Running would have made it chase us. Bears are curious, not aggressive unless provoked. Standing your ground tells them you're not prey." Cale shook his head, struggling to process what had just happened. "That was reckless. You could have been killed." Lucy smirked, though there was a hint of seriousness in her expression. "Yeah, maybe. But sometimes you gotta face things head on if you want to survive. Running doesn't solve anything." Her words struck a chord deep within Cale. On Vera, every threat was neutralized before it became real. People lived in safety bubbles, shielded from harm by technology and strict regulations. Here, survival required courage, adaptability, and an acceptance of uncertainty. For the first time, Cale questioned whether his own society's approach to life was truly superior. After the encounter with the bear, Lucy suggested they turn back, reasoning that they'd collected enough herbs for the day. As they retraced their steps down the mountain, Cale found himself replaying the incident in his mind. He admired Lucy's bravery, yes, but he also recognized how foreign it was to him. Growing up on Vera, he had never been taught to confront danger directly. Instead, he had learned to avoid it altogether, trusting in systems designed to keep him safe. When they returned to the farm, Lucy set about drying and storing the herbs while Cale sat on the porch, lost in thought. Eventually, she joined him, handing him a glass of cold lemonade. "You've been quiet," she said, sitting beside him. "What's on your mind?" Kyle hesitated, unsure how to articulate his feelings. "I've been thinking about the bear, about how you handled it. It was impressive." Lucy chuckled. "Thanks, I guess. But honestly, it wasn't that big a deal. Stuff like that happens all the time around here." "It is a big deal," Cale insisted. "Where I come from, no one would dare face something like that alone. We rely on machines, barriers, protocols. Danger is eliminated before it can even exist." Lucy tilted her head, studying him thoughtfully. "Sounds nice in a way. No worrying about bears or storms or anything else. But doesn't it get boring, knowing exactly what's going to happen every day?" Cale frowned. "Boring? No. Safe. Predictable. Isn't that better? Lucy shrugged. Maybe for some people, but I think living means taking risks, facing challenges. If everything's perfect all the time, what's the point? Her perspective puzzled Cale, yet it resonated with him in ways he couldn't fully explain. He thought about the stories he'd heard the night before, the tales of close calls and narrow escapes shared around the bonfire. Those experiences had shaped the humans who told them, giving them strength and resilience. Would someone from Vera even recognize those qualities, let alone value them? Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucy invited Kyle to join her for a walk along the edge of the forest. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and earth. They strolled in companionable silence, the only sounds coming from the rustling leaves and distant chirps of crickets. "I'm glad you're here," Lucy said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Not many people get to meet someone from another world. It's kinda cool." Kyle smiled faintly. "I feel the same way about meeting you. Humans are surprising. In a good way, I hope. In a challenging way," Kyle admitted. "You make me question things I've always taken for granted." Lucy grinned. "Good. Maybe you'll take some of that back with you when you leave." Kyle didn't respond right away. The idea of leaving felt distant, almost abstract. For now he was content to soak in the lessons Earth had to offer, to embrace its chaos and unpredictability, if only for a little while longer. As they headed back toward the house, Kyle glanced up at the stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. They looked the same as the ones he'd seen from Vera, yet somehow different. Brighter, perhaps, or more alive. Or maybe it was simply the company he kept that made them shine a little brighter tonight. Whatever the reason, Kale knew one thing for certain. His journey on Earth was changing him in ways he hadn't anticipated, and he was starting to think that might be a good thing. By the fourth day, Kale was beginning to settle into a rhythm. The initial shock of Earth's wild unpredictability had dulled slightly, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Each morning brought new experiences, some challenging, others unexpectedly pleasant, and Kale found himself looking forward to them in a way he never had before. It wasn't just the novelty of being on another planet. It was the people, especially Lucy, who made the days memorable. That morning, Lucy introduced Kale to one of her neighbors, an older man named Hank. He lived alone in a small cabin at the edge of the woods and spent most of his time tinkering with tools or repairing machinery for the community. His face was weathered from years of working outdoors, and his hands were calloused, but his eyes sparkled with warmth when he greeted. "Kyle. Never thought I'd meet someone from outer space," Hank said, shaking Kale's hand firmly. "You're taller than I expected." Kyle chuckled nervously. "I am told humans are shorter than my kind." Hank laughed, slapping him on the shoulder. "Well, don't let that go to your head. Around here, we judge folks by their character, not their height." The comment caught Kale off guard. On Vera, status was often determined by achievements, intellect, or lineage. Physical traits like height weren't relevant, but neither was something as intangible as character. Yet Hank's words carried weight, reminding Kale once again how differently humans approached life. After exchanging pleasantries, Hank invited them inside his workshop. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, and half-finished projects cluttered every available surface. A tractor engine sat in the center of the room, its parts spread out like pieces of a puzzle. Hank explained that he was fixing it for a local farmer whose equipment had broken down during planting season. "You ever worked on machines?" Hank asked Kale, handing him a wrench. Kale hesitated, unsure how to respond. Machines on Vera were self-repairing, maintained by automated systems that required no human intervention. Still, he didn't want to seem ungrateful, so he took the tool and mimicked Hank's movements as best he could. Lucy watched with amusement as Kale struggled to tighten a bolt. "Not exactly what you're used to, huh?" "No," Kale admitted. "But it is satisfying in a way." Hank nodded approvingly. "There's nothing like fixing something with your own two hands, makes you feel useful." As the morning wore on, Kale grew more comfortable with the task, though his progress was slow. By the time they left Hank's workshop, his fingers ached from gripping the wrench and grease stained his suit. But instead of feeling frustrated, he felt proud. For the first time, he understood the satisfaction of creating or repairing something tangible, a concept foreign to his technologically advanced world. Later that afternoon, Lucy took Cale to the town square, where a small market was set up. Farmers displayed fresh produce, artisans sold handmade crafts, and children ran between stalls laughing and chasing each other. The air buzzed with energy, filled with the mingling scents of baked goods, spices, and flowers. Lucy led Cale to a booth run by a woman named Clara, who sold jars of honey and homemade candles. She greeted Lucy warmly and eyed Cale with polite curiosity. "This is Cale," Lucy said. "He's visiting from, well, far away." Clara smiled, extending a jar of golden honey toward him. "Welcome to Pine Ridge. Try this. It's sweet." Cale accepted the jar cautiously, turning it over in his hands. The honey gleamed in the sunlight, its texture thick and sticky. Back on Vera, food was synthesized to perfection, devoid of imperfections or variations. This, however, was raw and natural, carrying the essence of the bees that had produced it. "It smells rich," Cale said, sniffing the jar. "That's because it's real," Clara replied. "Nothing fake about it." Cale dipped a finger into the honey and tasted it cautiously. The sweetness exploded in his mouth, accompanied by subtle floral notes. It was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, vivid and alive, just like everything else on Earth. As they wandered through the market, Cale noticed how connected everyone seemed. Neighbors exchanged greetings, vendors shared stories, and even strangers struck up conversations without hesitation. There was a sense of belonging, of community, that transcended individual differences. It reminded him of the bonfire gatherings, where laughter and camaraderie flowed freely. "You seem different today," Lucy remarked as they sat on a bench overlooking the bustling square, more relaxed. "I think I am," Cale replied thoughtfully. "This place, these people, they make me see things differently." Lucy grinned. "Good. Maybe you're starting to understand why we put up with all the craziness." Cale nodded slowly. "I think I do. Humans don't just survive here, they thrive. In spite of everything, the dangers, the hardships, you find joy in the little things. That's remarkable." Lucy's smile softened. "It's not always easy. Sometimes it feels like the world's against us, but we've got each other, and that makes all the difference." Her words stayed with Cale long after they returned to the farm. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, he sat on the porch watching the stars appear one by one. Lucy joined him, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "You know," she said, handing him a mug, "you're not so bad for an alien." Cale laughed softly. "And you're not so bad for a human." They sat in silence for a while, sipping their drinks and enjoying the cool night air. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked and crickets chirped steadily in the background. The sounds were comforting now, familiar even. "Do you ever get scared?" Cale asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Lucy tilted her head, considering the question. "Of course. Everyone gets scared sometimes. But fear doesn't have to control you. You can choose to let it stop you, or you can push through it." Cale nodded, reflecting on her earlier encounter with the bear. "I've spent my whole life avoiding danger. Here I'm learning to face it. And how does that feel?" "Strange," Kyle admitted. "But also freeing." Lucy smiled. "That's growth. Facing your fears changes you. Not always, in big ways, but enough to make a difference." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, stories from Lucy's childhood, tales of mischievous pets, and humorous mishaps involving farm equipment. Cale listened intently, marveling at how easily humans wove humor into their lives, even when recounting difficult moments. It was another lesson he found himself appreciating, the ability to laugh, even in the face of adversity. As the night deepened, Kyle realized how much he had changed in just a few short days. The rigid structure of Veyran society suddenly felt suffocating compared to the vibrant chaos of Earth. Here, imperfection wasn't seen as a flaw. It was celebrated as part of what made life meaningful. Before heading inside, Lucy turned to Kale with a thoughtful expression. "You'll take some of this back with you, won't you? When you leave, I mean." Kyle hesitated, then nodded. "I think I already have." Lucy smiled, patting his shoulder. "Good. Just remember, one step at a time. Even the biggest changes start small." With that, they went inside, leaving the porch bathed in moonlight. As Kyle drifted off to sleep that night, he couldn't help but wonder how his perspective would continue to evolve. Earth was teaching him lessons he hadn't anticipated, and though he still had much to learn, he was beginning to understand why humans thrived despite the odds. For the first time, Kale felt grateful for the challenges he faced. Not because they were easy, but because they forced him to grow. And in doing so, they revealed a truth he hadn't fully grasped before. Sometimes it's the hardest paths that lead to the most rewarding destinations. The fifth day began like any other, with the sun rising over Pine Ridge and casting a golden glow across the fields. Kyle had grown accustomed to the routine, waking early, helping Lucy with chores, and observing the daily life of the community. But this morning felt different. The air was unusually still, heavy with the promise of something looming on the horizon. As they worked in the fields, Lucy paused frequently to glance at the sky. Her brow furrowed slightly each time she looked up, and Kale noticed her unease. "What's wrong?" he asked finally, setting down the hoe he'd been using to weed the rows of corn. Lucy sighed, wiping sweat from her forehead. "It's too quiet. No wind, no birds. That usually means trouble." Kyle frowned. "Trouble?" She nodded grimly. "A wildfire could start any time. With the drought we've had, everything's dry as tinder. One spark and it'll spread fast." Kale's heart sank. He had read about wildfires in the reports before coming to Earth, but hearing Lucy talk about them made the threat feel immediate and real. On Vera, fires were non-existent thanks to advanced fire suppression systems. Here, nature ruled, and humans were left to fend for themselves against its fury. By midday, their fears were confirmed. A thick plume of smoke appeared on the edge of the forest, visible even from the fields. Within minutes, shouts echoed through the valley as neighbors alerted one another to the danger. Lucy grabbed Kale's arm and pulled him toward the house. "We need to help," she said urgently. "Everyone pitches in during a fire." Kale hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to flee. Wildfires were deadly, unpredictable forces of destruction. But Lucy's determination steadied him. She wasn't running. She was preparing to fight. If she could face this, so could he. At the house, Lucy handed Kale a pair of gloves and a shovel. "We're digging trenches to stop the fire from spreading," she explained quickly. "Follow me." They joined a group of townsfolk gathering near the edge of the woods. Flames crackled menacingly in the distance, devouring trees and sending spirals of ash into the air. The heat was intense, even from afar, and the acrid smell of burning wood filled Kale's nostrils. Despite his fear, he couldn't tear his eyes away from the inferno. "Stay close," Lucy instructed, leading him to a designated spot. "Dig deep and wide. We need to cut off the fire's fuel." Kale nodded, gripping the shovel tightly. His muscles screamed in protest as he dug into the hard, rocky soil, but he forced himself to keep going. Around him, others worked tirelessly, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. There was no panic, only focused determination. Even children helped, carrying buckets of water or tending to exhausted workers. For hours they labored under the scorching sun. The fire roared closer, its flames licking hungrily at the dry underbrush. At one point, a gust of wind sent embers flying dangerously near the trench Kale was working on. He froze, paralyzed by fear, until Lucy called out sharply. "Keep moving," she shouted, tossing dirt onto the glowing embers. If you stop, the fire wins. Her words snapped Cale out of his trance. He resumed digging, channeling his terror into action. Each swing of the shovel felt like a battle against the encroaching flames, and though his body ached, he refused to give up. As night fell, the fire finally began to subside. Exhausted but relieved, the townsfolk gathered around a makeshift campsite to assess the damage. Several homes had been destroyed, along with acres of forest and farmland. Yet miraculously, no lives had been lost. The collective effort had saved the town from total devastation. Cale collapsed onto the ground, his hands blistered and his suit caked with soot. Lucy sat beside him, handing him a bottle of water. Her face was smudged with ash and her hair clung damply to her forehead, but her smile was radiant. "You did good," she said, nudging him gently. "I wasn't sure you'd stick it out." "I almost didn't," Cale admitted. "But I couldn't let everyone else risk their lives while I ran away." Lucy nodded approvingly. "That's courage. Facing your fear instead of letting it control you." Kyle stared at the smoldering remains of the forest, his mind racing. Courage wasn't something he'd ever associated with himself. On Vera, survival was guaranteed, risks unnecessary. Here, bravery wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. And somehow, in the chaos of the wildfire, he had found it within himself. The next morning, the town came together to begin rebuilding. Families whose homes had been destroyed were offered shelter by neighbors. Volunteers cleared debris, salvaged what they could, and started repairs. Laughter and music drifted through the air as people sang songs and told jokes to lift spirits. To Cale, the resilience of these humans was nothing short of extraordinary. He joined Lucy in helping a family rebuild their barn. Though his hands were sore and his body weary, he pushed through the pain, determined to contribute. By the end of the day, the foundation of the new structure stood solidly in place, a testament to the community's unity and perseverance. That evening, as they sat around a bonfire once again, Cale reflected on everything that had happened. The wildfire had been devastating, yes, but it had also revealed the strength and compassion of the people around him. They hadn't waited for outside help or given in to despair. Instead, they had banded together, relying on one another to overcome the disaster. "You humans are incredible," Cale said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. Lucy raised an eyebrow, amused. "Incredible. Most days I just feel tired." Kyle shook his head. "No, really. You face challenges head on, support each other, and find joy even in the hardest times. I've never seen anything like it." Lucy smiled softly. "It's not about being special. It's about doing what needs to be done. Life's messy, but we make the best of it." Her words resonated deeply with Cale. For so long he had viewed humanity as primitive, their struggles a sign of weakness. Now he saw them for what they truly were: survivors, capable of thriving in conditions that would crush most species. Their imperfections weren't flaws, they were strengths. As the fire crackled and sparks floated upward into the starry sky, Cale realized how much he had changed since arriving on Earth. The rigid order of Vera suddenly seemed hollow compared to the vibrant unpredictability of human existence. Here, life was raw and real, full of both beauty and hardship. And though it terrified him at times, it also inspired him. Before heading inside, Lucy turned to Cale with a thoughtful expression. "You'll remember this place, won't you? When you go back home?" Kyle nodded firmly. "How could I forget? This world has taught me more than I ever expected." Lucy grinned. "Good. Maybe someday you'll bring some of it back with you." With that, they went inside, leaving the fire to burn low. As Cale lay in bed that night, he thought about the lessons he had learned, the importance of courage, community, and finding meaning in adversity. Earth had shown him a side of existence he hadn't known existed, and though his journey here was far from over, he already knew it would shape him forever. For the first time, Cale understood why humans thrived despite the odds. It wasn't because they were perfect or invincible. It was because they embraced the chaos, finding strength in their vulnerabilities and hope in their struggles. And in doing so, they created something truly remarkable, a way of life worth fighting for. The final days of Kale's stay on Earth passed quickly, filled with both reflection and celebration. Lucy and the townsfolk had planned a farewell party to mark his departure, insisting that no guest, especially one from another world, should leave without a proper send-off. Kale felt overwhelmed by their kindness, but also saddened by the thought of leaving. In such a short time, Pine Ridge had become more than just a place to him. It was a home, and its people had become his friends. On the evening of the party, everyone gathered in a clearing near the forest. Strings of lights hung between trees, casting a warm glow over the scene. A bonfire crackled in the center, surrounded by logs and chairs where people sat talking and laughing. The air smelled of roasted marshmallows, grilled meat, and fresh pine needles. Children ran around playing games while adults shared stories and jokes. Music played softly in the background, provided by a young man strumming an acoustic guitar. Kale stood off to the side, watching everything unfold. He still marveled at how effortlessly humans came together, turning even simple moments into something meaningful. Back on Vera, gatherings were formal affairs, planned meticulously and executed with precision. Here, joy seemed to bubble up naturally, unscripted and genuine. Lucy approached him, holding 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. "You look lost in thought," she said, handing him one of the cups. "I am," Kyle admitted. "I've never seen anything like this before. It's beautiful." Lucy smiled. "It's just us being us. No big deal." Kale shook his head. "That's what makes it special. You don't try to be anything other than who you are." Lucy chuckled. "Well, don't get too sentimental. We're about to embarrass you with gifts." True to her word, the townsfolk began presenting Kale with tokens of gratitude. Hank gave him a small carving of a tree, its bark textured and lifelike. Clara handed him a jar of honey, wrapped in a ribbon. Others offered handmade items, a woven bracelet, a sketch of the mountains, and even a photograph of the group taken during the wildfire cleanup. Each gift was simple yet deeply personal, carrying the essence of the giver and the community. When it was Lucy's turn, she held out a wooden pendant, shaped like a star. "This is for you," she said, "so you'll always remember us. Whenever you see something growing against the odds, think of Pine Ridge." Kale took the pendant, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," he managed to say. "All of you. I will never forget this place, or you." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, lifting Kyle's spirits despite the bittersweetness of the moment. As the night wore on, they sang songs, danced under the stars, and shared laughter that echoed through the trees. For Kale, it was a perfect ending to an unforgettable journey. The next morning, Kale prepared to leave. His sleek spacecraft gleamed in the sunlight, a stark contrast to the rustic surroundings. Lucy walked him to the landing pad, her hands stuffed into her pockets as she tried to mask her sadness. "You ready?" she asked, though her voice wavered slightly. Kale nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Lucy forced a smile. "Don't forget us, okay? And don't let those fancy aliens boss you around too much." Kale laughed softly. "I won't. You've taught me too much for that." They stood there for a moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. Finally, Lucy stepped forward and hugged him tightly. "Take care of yourself, Kale, and maybe someday you'll come back." "I hope so," Kale replied, returning the hug. "Until then, thank you for everything." With that, he climbed aboard the spacecraft, waving one last time, before the door sealed shut. As the engines roared to life, Kale watched through the window as Pine Ridge grew smaller and smaller, until it disappeared entirely. Back on Vera, Kale struggled to adjust to his old life. Everything felt sterile and artificial compared to Earth. The smooth, polished surfaces of his home lacked the texture and warmth of weathered wood. Conversations with his peers felt hollow, devoid of the humor and connection he had grown accustomed to. Even the food tasted bland, lacking the rich flavors of fresh produce and homemade meals. At first, many dismissed Kale's newfound perspective as naive or idealistic. How could someone prefer chaos to perfection? But as he began sharing his experiences, stories of wildfires, bears, and human resilience, some started listening. They were intrigued by tales of a species thriving not because of technology or control, but because of courage, unity, and acceptance of imperfection. Kyle threw himself into his work, becoming an advocate for embracing challenges rather than avoiding them. He wrote extensively about humanity, highlighting their ability to find joy amidst hardship and strength in vulnerability. His lectures drew crowds, some curious, others skeptical, but all captivated by his passion. Years later, Kyle became one of the most renowned anthropologists in Varen history. His research reshaped how his people viewed humanity, challenging long-held assumptions about progress and survival. Though not everyone agreed with his ideas, they sparked important conversations about the value of imperfection and the beauty of unpredictability. One day, while walking through a museum exhibit inspired by his writings, Kale paused in front of a display featuring Lucy's wooden star pendant. Visitors lingered nearby, reading the plaque that described its significance, a symbol of growth, resilience, and the enduring spirit of humanity. Kyle smiled, remembering the woman who had changed his life. She had shown him that living wasn't just about existing. It was about embracing the messiness, taking risks, and finding meaning in every moment. Earth had been a chaotic, unpredictable place, but it had also been extraordinary. And thanks to Lucy and the people of Pine Ridge, Kale had learned to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. As he left the museum, Kale glanced up at the sky, imagining Earth orbiting somewhere far beyond. Someday, he promised himself, he would return, not as a visitor but as someone who truly belonged. Until then, he carried Pine Ridge with him, etched into his heart like the carvings on Hank's wooden tree. And whenever doubt crept in, he touched the star pendant hanging around his neck, reminding himself of the lesson he had learned. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the brightest stars.